therapist, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about books that I've been reading. We read What to Do When Children Clam Up in Psychotherapy, and it is a fantastic book by Dr. Kathy Malchiati and Dr. David Crenshaw. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about my own personal thoughts about this book. But before we do that, let me just give you a little bit of kind of information. The book club, again, is what play therapists are reading to shape their play therapy practice. And when we talk about books in this setting, I want to give you full disclosure that in this particular case, I bought this book with my own money. I'm not getting paid for my review. If ever that is not the case, then I will definitely tell you. But in this situation, I purchased this book from Barnes & Noble online. You can buy it at Amazon. It's less than $30. I want to try to give you some positive applications for what this book is going to do for your play therapy practice. And also to just remind everybody that these are play therapy leaders and also our colleagues. And so if you have criticism of the book or of any book in your comments, please make sure that that remains respectful at all times. So, talking about this book, the description that they give on the book itself is that this book is for therapists who work with children who are frequently faced with non-responsive, reticent, or completely non-verbal clients. This volume brings together expert clinicians who explore why 4 to 16-year-olds may have difficulty talking and provide creative ways to facilitate that communication. And again, edited by Dr. Kathy Malchiati and Dr. David Crenshaw, with contributors like Bruce Perry, Risa Van Fleet, Nancy Boyd Webb. I mean, there's just so many people who are part of this book. And one of the good things about this book is it's one of those edited books, so you could read chapter 8 and then you could go back and read chapter 2 on a completely different day. Each chapter is connected to the overall topic, but they stand alone, and really these authors that have contributed to this book have written their own volumes of books on that topic specifically, and so you're getting just a tiny snippet. But the information that is in here is so jam-packed that you are just probably going to have to read it more than once, to be honest. It's just so great. So I want to tell you a little bit about some of my favorite chapters. So chapter 8 is about treating adolescent attachment trauma. So you can really never get enough information about treating attachment trauma. And so you'll really love chapter 8. Most people are very interested in anything written by Bruce Perry and his colleagues, and so chapter 3 is about the neurosequential therapeutics approach and all of that stuff about healing the brain from the bottom up. Chapter 6 is about polyvagal informed dance therapy. And polyvagal theory is one of the things that's on my list of things to try to learn more about, and this chapter is so filled with information and graphics and all kinds of practical applications that you're definitely going to want to read that chapter more than once. And then finally, I loved chapter 10, which was about art therapy approaches, and again gives you some very helpful tools. And that is not to say that those are the only chapters that are good. Every chapter is, like I said, it could be a whole book in and of itself, and many of these authors have written whole books on those topics by themselves. But those are the chapters that really stood out for me and things that I really found to be the most helpful. And again, you can read them in any order. So you may pick up and go straight to Bruce Perry's chapter and read that information, and then you could just spend a week probably integrating that information and talking about it before you move on and pick up another chapter. There are a couple of things that I want to talk about that are very memorable. And right at the very beginning of the book, Dr. Crenshaw talks about this concept of hide and seek in therapy and the metaphor that it represents when children are silent or clammed up. And what he says, I'm quoting from the book, is the therapy process is conceptualized partially as a sophisticated version of hide and seek. The child in hiding depends on a determined seeker to be found. And what child in hiding doesn't ultimately want to be found? And so he's talking about the seeker being the therapist. And when you listen to him talk about that metaphor, when you read him talk about that metaphor, and you will see hide and seek in a whole nother way. So I strongly recommend that. And then Martha Strauss on page 170 reminds us of this most simple thing, which says, so if you don't know what else to do, listen fully. Allow yourself to feel for and with them. Be kind. For these kids, that's an intervention. So we talked about that in the book club, and it was just a good reminder, and it's something that I want and will really take away from this book, one of my absolute favorite passages, because it's something that we know, and as therapists it's something that I think we do all the time, but to have someone simply remind us that for a lot of kids, having someone be kind to them is an intervention in and of itself. And so that's something that we can give ourselves credit for doing when we're in therapy. So having that little reminder on your bookshelf, I think, is a really good thing. There's a couple of other research statistics that they talk about in the book that stood out for me and that I just remember every time I reach for this book. And one of them was about repetition. And so on page 50, they talk about the idea that you can perform an action consciously but awkwardly after 30 hours of practice. But to do it unconsciously and with precision required as many as 50,000 practice episodes. So currently, I'm trying to actually learn how to use this system with YouTube and live streaming and all this. And I totally feel like I'm doing it consciously and very awkwardly, but working on getting those 50,000 practice episodes. So if you're working with a child or with a family, or you're learning something yourself, be kind to yourself and remember that the research backs you up, that it's going to take a lot longer than you thought it was going to take to learn. The second, more sad research statistic that they talk about in the book, and he mentions it on page 20 and again on page 180, is that recent surveys reveal that among adults who acknowledge being sexually abused as children, only 10% of those disclosed during childhood. So I just want you to remember that. And so when you have kids who maybe have suspicions about sexual abuse, or who are in therapy and are quiet, and you feel like maybe you need to do a very directive technique to be able to get them to talk about this abuse that you've heard of or that you're suspicious of, just know that it is not a reflection of you always as the therapist that they have decided not to disclose. That research supports the idea that this is something that's extremely difficult and that a lot of people are waiting until adulthood to be able to do. And then the book throughout talks about ways that you can honor that process and that you can respect it. And as Dr. Crenshaw says, resist the idea of resistance, and that topic that because people are being quiet, that it means they're resistant to therapy. And he looks at it from a completely different perspective, as do the other contributing authors of this book. Look at it from a different perspective and say it's not necessarily resistance, but it is part of the process, and that the way that we can do that is honoring that process with these kids in this way. So those were my absolute favorites. Again, the book is phenomenal. I love it. I want to read it again because I think they say you forget 20% of everything that you learn within the first month. So I know I've already forgotten more than is necessary, and I really want to read it again. So thank you so much.